F1's first test of 2026 has ended, and despite it being closed off, we've actually learned a ton, getting the first big clues for how everybody started this massive new car and engine rules era. Testing sleeper hit. Ferrari was the sleeper hit of this test, starting off quietly and productive, if not earning rave reviews like a certain other team, before jumping to the top of the times right at the end of the week. Even before Lewis Hamilton's late Mercedes-beating surge, this was shaping up to be a strong week for Ferrari. As strong as we can judge, with so many testing caveats, of course. Charles Leclerc had already got closer to Mercedes' benchmark on the final day before handing the car over, so the SF26 looks reasonably brisk. And the team's also clearly well prepared, as when you factor in that its first day on track was limited somewhat by awful weather conditions, clearing 2,000 kilometers as the second busiest team is even more impressive. Hamilton was particularly happy and reckons this pre-season has already started better than 2025. Given Ferrari considers this only its Spec A car with much more development to come, that's a good place to be. Mercedes, the real benchmark. Mercedes still feels like the real early benchmark though, given it didn't run on the final day when track conditions were likely at their best, and at least one other team has tentatively got Mercedes ahead of the pack. By its own admission, Mercedes could not have hoped for a better first week of testing and set an unmatchable early standard in terms of mileage, basically the equivalent of an extra half a day of testing than next best Ferrari. It admitted it would have run even more if other cars hadn't stopped on track and caused red flags, and its test total of 2,328 kilometers is amazingly very close to the most completed by a team at either of the last 3 pre-season tests with no rule changes. Feedback in the real world has been tentatively positive too, as the car feels better than it did on the simulator and the drivers are happy with initial engine drivability, even with greater electric power and no MGUH. Mercedes also looks a step ahead of its customer teams, and obviously that includes McLaren, making full use of its work status with the demands of these brand new engines. But the big caveat is you might remember Mercedes had a great first test with the new 2022 cars too, which was obviously no precursor to meaningful success over a humbling 4 years. Red Bull engine surprises. Red Bull's new in-house engine division didn't go unnoticed at Mercedes, with George Russell name-checking them on the opening day and then indirectly referring to the engine again on Thursday. He said it was impressive and quite surprising to see what the new manufacturers have been capable of, and unless Russell's got a completely different view of Audi's running to everyone else, that can only mean Red Bull Ford powertrains. Russell was right to say that the first test for Red Bull's engine had gone much better than expected, with a really healthy number of laps compared to the established manufacturers, considering this is just a 2-team program. Max Verstappen said Red Bull's engine had hit the ground running quite well, and Racing Bull's Chief Technical Officer Tim Goss lauded the drivability in particular, calling it fantastic. But of course, we need to wait to see its ultimate performance. Own goals for F1. The initial plan for this private test, organised by the teams, was for a complete information blackout with media and creators banned. In the end, compromises ensured some limited official F1 coverage and what the teams shared on social media, which some teams didn't like and left some fans feeling like it was a halfway house. With photos and video being put out, it wasn't a good look for F1 to then have security and the police threatening spectators and media with fines for watching from the hills overlooking the track. And it wasn't missed that F1's own official reporting and highlights from the event went pretty full on propaganda and seemed to limit any mention of red flags or problems. For example, there was widespread mockery of Isaac Hadjar's big crash on Tuesday being referred to by F1 as a small off. The secrecy and spin was also needless, considering those on the ground were getting information out anyway, and also the cars ran so well. Mileage was impressive almost universally across the teams, and even those that caused red flags at some point, like Alpine and Haas, were able to rebound with monster final days, completing 164 and 190 laps respectively. So given fears about the new cars and engines' reliability was the main justification for keeping the test private, it all felt a bit unnecessary. We worked around it as best we could with sources on the ground and what information was released. But we'll be on site properly in Bahrain, even though there won't be full live TV coverage from the next test, so make us your paddock pass for 2026 by picking up a 7-day free trial to the Race Members Club. We'll take you behind the scenes for the rest of testing and the entire 2026 season with exclusive insight and special content. Just check out the link in the description to claim your free trial. Problems for 2025 pace setters. This was a middling test for last year's champion McLaren and also Red Bull as a team, as each had setbacks to recover from in the middle of their programs. Red Bull ran on the first 2 days of the test immediately, which all seemed to be going pretty smoothly until Hajar shunt. The damage was such that the Red Bull didn't reappear for its final permitted date on track until Friday, after spares were flown out from Milton Keynes. No major track time was lost at least, and Max Verstappen got a nice full day in the car on Friday, completing 118 laps, although the 4-time world champion will be hoping there's plenty being held back, given he was just over a second off the pace. And it was simply not as productive a test as other big teams managed, which also goes for McLaren. Slow to get going on its first morning of track running, McLaren then lost even more time on the MCL40's second day because of a fuel system issue. Friday was smoother, with drivers getting a good amount of track time with 162 laps combined. That brought McLaren's total up to just about average, but not as much over the week as it had intended. New Aston Martin's the wildcard. Aston Martin made us wait and wait and wait some more to see its first Adrian Newey-led design, but it was well worth it. Visually striking with some fundamentally different architecture and interesting aerodynamic choices, the AMR26 is definitely the wildcard in the pack. Who knows if it's actually any good, because the extremely late arrival meant the car didn't run long enough or quickly enough to judge how well those novel solutions work in reality, or what kind of state new engine partner Honda is in. We believe the car is overweight by quite a reasonable amount at the moment, so even by testing standards, this could be the car currently furthest from its ultimate potential. That just makes it all the better that we actually got sight of it, after what Fernando Alonso called a very, very intense couple of weeks trying to get it ready, hence running with an unusual blue rear light to warn other cars it was sometimes running with a self-imposed speed limit. Audi has a long to-do list. Audi's first F1 car and engine was signed off in a preliminary form to be able to run an early shakedown and rack up good mileage here. The final version of both should be more advanced, but that initial caution wasn't really rewarded with a stunningly productive test. Audi had costly problems on all 3 days it ran, causing 2 red flags and spending a chunk of Friday morning in the garage again. A very good recovery after that slow start meant it managed 60% of its weekly running on that final day, but it still ended up one of the worst teams in terms of on-track productivity. That's why project leader Mattia Binotto, formerly of Ferrari, said with a bit of a smile the list of things to do after this test is the longest he's ever seen. Cadillac's deceptive deficit. Cadillac made a stuttering start to the test and didn't log stunning mileage, but this was all part of what Valtteri Bottas described as the problem-solving phase for F1's newest team. Plenty was learned on the first day of running, and the team spent Tuesday and Wednesday focused on off-track work before returning to action, and Sergio Perez said they were even starting to get into setup work. But as well as limited running, it's no surprise that Cadillac's headline pace was nowhere. Expectations should be set low for 2026, but there's no doubt the car will show more pace in the next test in Bahrain, as the team with vastly more to do than any of its rivals works through its program. That's why team boss Graham Loudon said he's still really happy with the test Cadillac ended 4.5 seconds off the pace and bottom on mileage out of the teams that used their full 3-day allocation. What the cars are like. Teams and drivers had plenty of experience of these cars in the digital domain, but it's only now that they've been able to experience them for real. As world champion Lando Norris said, the cornering speed is down thanks to the reduced downforce, which means the cars visibly scrabble for grip in the corners, but the straight line speed and acceleration, with a fair amount of wheel spin, catches the attention. Mercedes driver George Russell even suggested after watching from trackside that the cars were travelling faster than he's ever seen on the main straight. Hamilton, obviously no fan of the preceding ground effect era, called these cars more enjoyable, oversteery and sliding, but a little bit easier to catch. And for those that care about the noise, the first impression is that they seem to be a step up from last year thanks to the muffling effect of the MGU-H having been removed. From observing practice starts, it also seems drivers like their getaways to be done with some very punchy revs, and all the engines have subtly different sounds. We can't wait for our first chance to study these and the cars themselves up close at the next test in Bahrain.